Let's hear it for Warner Brothers and DC Studios, busting out with easily the best and freshest comic book movie of 1996. Interesting choice to release it 30 years later in 2026, but still, good movie is a good movie. Okay, so I know this is a movie based on a comic book with a woman in it, and we're unfortunately on YouTube, which means some of you are just here to scream podcast words into the replies and otherwise make asses of yourselves for attention, and believe me, children, I understand the sad desperation of the attention economy as a concept. But for real though, fellas, if you are here with Team Show Up to complain that a Supergirl movie exists, like, if that is your tribe, ain't y'all supposed to be busy with something else, like helping the president win a war against pond water and or brown people or whatever?
There are too many minorities at my water park.
Anyway, yeah, I'm not kidding though about that 90s thing up front. Well, it's been refreshing that there doesn't really seem to be a unifying top-down aesthetic for this James Gunn DC Studios universe project, with all the various properties in movies, TV, and animation so far really actually seeming to get their own thing for tone, aesthetic, and content vibe. If there is something that sort of brings it all together a bit, it's that there's this very strong 90s comics and 90s superhero movie groove that's running through the whole thing. Not everywhere all the time, just more than you'd think, given how much of a punchline that whole era has been for so long in the geek cinema community. Yeah, case in point, here's Supergirl, which answers the pre-criticism of, isn't this just a superhero movie that we already saw last year but with a gender flip? With, no, actually, this is a gritty but not exactly dark mid-90s style sci-fi movie, think like Fifth Element, Tank Girl, Lost in Space, maybe a little Total Recall, talking aesthetics here, not necessarily quality or plot, where a superheroine is the main character, but she's in outer space, so the different planets she goes to can affect whether or not she has her win instantly and end the movie right away powers, because that's how that works here, and we reconscripted Jason Momoa, but to play Lobo, the most 90s DC Comics character ever. Also, it runs barely over 90 minutes. And joking aside, this really does have the exact energy of a Supergirl movie that they might have made as a standalone, with or without a universe to gesture at tying into back in the actual 90s, just for less money and some glancing references to the late Peter David's run, instead of the Tom King series that this one nominally is inspired by now. It's structured to let Kara do her thing out of costume for the most part, downplaying the cross-branding and going for an angry cool kid growing into the role angle as opposed to a straight-up origin movie, handing her flashbacks to fill out Krypton's backstory that we didn't get that much of in the Superman movie, and leans into the this is a quick fun space adventure where she can sometimes fly and beat up tanks thing as a steady pace all the way to the end. So story-wise, it's a quick and basic thing. Kara has stopped off on a planet for a rest stop, and she happens on a young girl who's looking to hire muscle to help her find and kill the space pirates who robbed and murdered her family. Kara isn't really into revenge quests because she's just seen too much bullshit in her life already, but the same pirates wound Crypto the Superdog with a quick-acting poison, so she heads off to chase them down for the antidote, and the girl ends up tagging along. In the course of their travels, they bump into Lobo, who's like a space bounty hunter guy. He's basically a 12-year-old boy's idea of the most badass dude ever if it climbed right out of his study hall sketchbook and came to life, and he's also chasing the same pirates, so that's convenient. In all sincerity, this is a very old-fashioned, stripped-down, they don't make them like this anymore, B-tier style blockbuster. Like, if not for how expensive most of the effects work looks, it absolutely feels like it is, would, and maybe should have been made decades ago in that lighter, flightier, just a little bit more forgiving era of comic book movies where a bunch of wacky space alien makeup, production design, and costuming that all screams, yeah, we like DC, but we love 2000 AD, and a supporting anti-hero basically made of chains, biker gear, and heavy metal affectations would have been more than enough to back up a star vehicle for a capable young actress, and in fact, Millie Alcock proves herself quite adept at giving Kara some fun, bitter party girl pathos that carry through an admittedly familiar hero who doesn't want to get involved but then gets involved anyway character arc. Part of what's interesting here is the level of restraint on display, though. They really do commit to this gimmick of pulling out, oh, this is a red sun area, so Kara can't use her powers right now, and then, oh, yellow sun, now she goes Super Saiyan for for a bit narrative movers, and then the extremely telegraphed, yeah, but it's a good bit all the same build up for we're saving the most familiar capital S super stuff like the costume and the big lifting and the I-beams for when it really counts routine, and they're much more judicious about Lobo than you'd expect considering the marketing. Like, that's the sort of supporting character that could overwhelm a movie, but he's in here exactly enough. He shows up, he beats some guys up, he flips around the chain, he rides around on his motorcycle, he says basically nothing but really cool stuff, aura farms as the kids say, and then he takes off until he needs to show up and do that again. The whole thing really feels like just enough. The temptation to go bigger on the basis that it's a superhero movie releasing in summer, introducing what they're hoping to be a big recurring character, must have been enormous. There are, to be certain, a handful of not great looking green screen shots that kind of scream the test audiences said she doesn't fly enough, so show her flying more from scene to scene transitions. But they could have pumped this up with more characters, bigger villains, continuity stuff, but they don't do that. This is only a movie about Supergirl and her friend looking for bad guys, sometimes running into Lobo, finding the bad guys. Over the course, there's a couple of nifty action scenes where Kara beats people up, Lobo beats people up, we get flashbacks for more Krypton stuff and some Superman stuff. Eventually they fight the main bad guy, and yep, solid, tight little movie, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, I mean, except that Warner Brothers doesn't really seem to know what to do for promoting and releasing this, since it feels like a quintessential fall or at least late summer or early spring blockbuster, and they're releasing it for June right now, like right after a new Toy Story just came out, but also nobody seems to know what the release model for these things are, period. It's not the sequel to Superman, they aren't tracking it like that, but also nobody knows what the model is for female-fronted movies in this genre anymore on their own, because it's kind of all over the place. I mean, there's been one previous Supergirl movie, and it's one of the most famous bombs in the history of the genre. Do we even need to talk about The Flash? On the other hand, Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel, both gigantic hits. Captain Marvel 2, not a gigantic hit. Wonder Woman 2, straight to streaming during COVID, kind of hard to say, but everyone kind of agrees that would have also been the opposite of a big hit, right? Because that movie was... Like, remember how bad that was? That was so bad Patty Jenkins lost that Star Wars movie after it came out. Remember? Yeah, she booked a Henry herself.
I renounce my wish.
So I'm not exactly sure that this is a movie that belongs out at the top of the summer, but I'm glad it's here because it's old school, and that makes it different. Just about everything else on the incoming release slate that isn't explicitly a kid's movie or a comedy is set to be this big, bombastic, maybe a little too long even if it's a good thing. So a quick, comparatively mid-sized, meet the hero, fight a handful of bad guys, get the thing action movie that also lets you out with plenty of time left to do other stuff feels like a goddamn revelation as an experience, even if it's a deliberately breezy and slight 7 out of 10 as an actual movie. Good stuff. Millie Alcock is obviously a movie star. I had a great time with this. What a nice surprise. Check it out.